I think we can start with Hank Blaney today. Hank?
Hi, my name's Hank Blaney. I'm the president of AMM in this, the best year ever. Our holiday party is scheduled for December 8th. Originally, it was going to be at the Gem Saloon in New York. However, it will be held virtually. The big idea is that each member will have their favorite drink recipe. Please join us so you can find out what goes into the El Severe. Next, this will be tentatively June 17th at Liberty Cafe. That's in Jersey City. It'll be convenient for all of us from New York, as well as our colleagues in New Jersey and Philadelphia. Looking forward to that. And voting will go out in the next month or two. We are planning that to be an in-person event. Lastly, thank you very much to Amy Turnquist for today's event, for thinking of the idea, for inviting our panelists and guests, and booking this wonderful room. Thank you, Amy, and back to you, Jason.
Thanks, Hank. And if anybody has any questions, AMMonline.org is the website. And a quick plug, keep an eye out for season 3 of the AMM Conversation podcast coming to you hopefully late November, early December. And this panel roundtable will probably be a part of that. So keep an eye out and keep listening. Thanks again for everybody for joining us today. I know Todd said that the weather's terrible, but guess what? Online, eco-friendly, right? Nice 72 degrees wherever you are. And so you've already met Hank. Let's talk about the panelists today. Joining us, Jim Delash. Jim is U.S. Marketing Director of Customer Experience for Vaccines at GlaxoSmithKline. And Lori Holland Hancock. She's the director of the multi-channel integration team for oncology at Merck. Panelists, thank you very much for joining us today. Let's start out with a question for you, Lori. The COVID-19 pandemic in the United States has been, well, it's reaching the 8-9 month mark now. It's a sobering fact, and unfortunately, it's still with us. While some industries have been devastated, travel and things of that nature, healthcare has been vital during the crisis, and pharmaceuticals seem to have weathered the storm better than others. Could you start us with a quick state of the industry update?
Sure, Jason. I think the industry is definitely still in a state of flux, and we're still learning how to manage through COVID, but we're doing better with it. And how I see our industry, it takes me back to the days of old where we're really partnering more with the medical community. Not that we haven't in the past, but there seemed to have been a bit of a firewall between industry and physicians. And now, because we're facing this pandemic together, we're really trying to problem solve and come together as to how the best solution for physicians as well as patients. But it is, the virus has its own way of thinking, and it helps us to be more nimble and pivot as states open and close at the same time. And then how do we continue to support our customers through these different waves of the pandemic and be very relevant. I also see, us coming together as an industry that kind of helps solve from a vaccine perspective or a cure perspective of how do we bring our best scientists together and our best minds and ideas in manufacturing, because this is a pandemic that's of global magnitude that we've never faced before, and we have to be within the industry. It's not about one company, it's about us against the virus. So I'm very positive that the industry can overcome this, but it's good to see the collaboration in ways that I haven't seen before.
I'll just add to that too, take more of a company point of view. I agree with everything Lori said about the industry coming together. I think that's really important. In our business, I believe a lot in segmentation when you think about marketing. So when you think about the state of the business, it depends on which segment you're talking about. So things like respiratory are generally doing fairly well right now because people are affected by this, may have respiratory ailments. So the business does benefit from that. The flip side to that is something like vaccines, which is dependent on well visits to the doctor, which are down significantly, have been down, although they're starting to come back. So it depends on where you are in the business, what effect this is having. I think overall it's been okay. It is good to see companies working together and collaborating for the public health good. That's kind of why we're all in this anyway. And it's fun to compete with other companies, and it's all good, but it's also good to see everybody kind of come together too.
Yeah.
Great, Jim. I've heard through guests on the AMM Conversation podcast that pharma has become uber focused on targeting during the pandemic. The message, the media selection, recommendations, much more focused than what has been done historically, mainly due to a shifting HCP mindset during this crisis and the pandemic. Can you explain the biggest adjustments you've made this year in response to so many traditional channels being disrupted at once?
It's interesting, Jason, because when I was thinking about this, the idea of targeting and focusing on certain segments of the population within the healthcare provider community, we've been doing that for a long time. I imagine most marketers are. We're not just going out, broad and general. The benefit you have in marketing to healthcare professionals is we all know who they are. We have a database full of them. We know it's not like consumer marketing where you've got to go find people who have asthma or whatever. It's like, I know who they are. We can focus. I think what things like a pandemic do is accelerate trends that were going to happen anyway. So as rep access becomes limited, now you've got to figure out ways to change your message and get the right message there. So that's what we've been doing more than the media. It's been the messaging that's been changed, because right away you think about, and in my world of vaccines, it's a lot of, when you're talking about a preventative message, there's a little bit of fear factor involved. How else do you sell something unless if you don't take this vaccine, this could happen? So you have to be careful with that in a pandemic where things are happening, that could be pretty bad out there. So we've dialed that down a little bit. But as far as the mix of media, we've expanded our efforts, but really not into new media as much as just new messaging based on the segment.
I would definitely agree with what was being said. And I think what has been highlighted here, I think the industry was already going to a more focused shift based on targeting and the HCP mindset. But what I also see is leaders really looking more in a multi-channel or omni-channel space. And how do we now have better cross coordination across channels, as well as, what's going to be our strategy from a pull to a push strategy. And this ability for us to really talk through not just the pandemic, but it also kind of highlights some of the healthcare disparities, and how do we kind of, as was previously said, pivot our message to kind of address some newer situations where we weren't, we may have been focused, but we need to kind of elevate that a bit more.
So just to build on one of the things Lori just mentioned about like leadership being more involved and being more aware of things like digital and media, which I think is the case. It's a little bit, there's more education required, because one of the things we realized, things like reach, when you talk about reach for the sales force, salesperson reaches the office, they talk to them, they detail it, whatever, that counts as one reach. Well, one email to a doctor, technically that's a reach, but not really. It's not really the same effect. So we try to define things in terms of effective reach, because we can reach everybody. Like I said, we have a database, we can send an email to everybody and reach them all, but that's not really going to matter that much. Where if you had enough sales force that you could reach everybody that you needed to as often as it would have likely more impact. So it is about redefining some of the terms and explaining kind of what we've been learning over the years through testing and models and so on, to say it's not like reach and frequency like it. It's different in this space, and offline and online have to work together to come up with the right experience, which is different than in person.
Yeah.
So let's dig a little deeper, and this is kind of the past 6-8 months. Now we're heading towards the end of 2020. I mean, November's around the corner. God bless us all. um, you know, Lori, what's different about as you start preparing for 2021? What's going to be different?
Um, I think when I think of what is different, it's making sure, getting back to the comments around reach, but it's also about reach and engagement and really thinking through um, your digital investment with a purpose and opportunity. And how are you laddering that back to your, marketing objectives and strategic imperatives and communication objectives? Um, and I think it's more around, are there newer channels in 2021 where our customers have now pivoted to, where we may not have either been or been as deep into those channels? And how does our strategy pivot to meet the customers of where they're going to find educational needs across some newer channels that are beyond, I guess, what I call beyond the email, and think through other platforms like social and podcasting and other areas, and just being a bit more innovative. I think the other thing that's going to be important for 2021 is going beyond the traditional partnership with some of our investment partners or digital partners, and thinking, are there newer things that we could create together in this space that are going to be relevant to a physician?
Jim, did you want to follow up there?
Yeah, one of the more practical things that's different for us is the alternate plan. So you have a plan based on an assumption of, COVID's going to be here through the first half of the year, or whatever it is, whatever the assumption is. You got to assume something, or it's going to be business as usual. And then you have sort of the backup plan. You have key markers to say, okay, as of February 1, if nothing's changed, we're going to go to plan B, or whatever it is. You have to kind of do double plans almost, depending on the product. So we have some products that are more relevant for college freshmen or students, young people graduating high school, going off to college. Well, if they're not going off to college, or they're going to be at home going to college, that's different. They're not going to, so we have to have plan B. If they are, then it's kind of back to, and then there's a timing element. So all that stuff, you start with a base of assumptions based on what we know today, and you modify it, and you have alternate plans. It's kind of what you normally do too, but the plan B is a lot deeper than it would have been otherwise. I think that's the big change for us. And, we all know how it's not that easy to develop creative quickly. So you have to really plan ahead, and, you also don't want to make it so generic that it could be used anywhere, because then it's not going to work. So there's a lot more work in that kind of in the planning phase. But I really think that's a good thing, though. I think it's forcing you to think about things you wouldn't have otherwise thought of. And then also be able to identify those time periods where, if this is true at this date, I'll react. If it's not, I'm going to keep going. I think that's kind of just good planning in general. And that's been what we've been putting our plans together for next year with that in mind.
On a little bit more granular scale for our target audience, what is changing about your work in working with agencies, consultancies, vendors, et cetera? Jim, can you start us out there?
Sure. It's interesting because it's sort of what I was just talking about with another plan. Other than that, our way of approaching, a multi-channel or a customer experience plan is, like always, you start with segments, you go to creative messages, you go to channels, and then you go to the website. That's the way we approach it. And that's some kind of steps. Along the way, you look for the big idea. Where's the big idea? Is it going to be a new media source? Is it going to be a creative idea? Is it going to be some insight into a segment that's been different than what it was before? Maybe through more models. We're looking at many more models than we ever did, predictive models and artificial intelligence, data science, all those kinds of things, to just see if we can start to understand better what's driving behavior. And then you come up with, you develop these hypotheses. You don't start to say, well, I think it's because of, the economics of the situation. That's why people are doing this. And then we just proceed. It's like, no, that's my hypothesis. Now, what do I do to prove it or disprove it? And by the way, I've got 4 other hypotheses about what's that behavior is causing. So we're not forcing, we're encouraging the agencies we work with to be thinking along those lines. And just like, we don't know the answer. We have to have a hypothesis to start with. And then you have to be really disciplined in identifying those hypotheses worth pursuing, that if proven correct, it's going to matter enough to the business. Because if you can be proven correct with something and then you find out, well, it didn't really matter. And I think that's a hard part too, because you're just estimating impact. And, I encourage the team to look at things like relative. I don't want to say it's $100 million impact when you do all the math. I just say, look, that's 100 million. One that's half as good as 50 million or whatever the numbers are. It doesn't really matter. It's about the relative proportion of those impacts. And you say this one 10 times more valuable than that one. Yeah, okay. If it's 8, 10, doesn't really matter. It's much more. Let's pursue that one. So we've just kind of tried to get involved more in that kind of thinking because of this uncertainty. But other than that, we haven't veered off too much from what we normally do. It's just a different variable in the mix.
I think just to kind of add to what was being said, I agree. We're not doing a whole lot different, but what is unique and different is the tools and capabilities. Either AI was mentioned and machine learning, and how can that help us really kind of break through some of the data parameters and really provide deeper level insights. Beyond just our traditional market research, it's important to really understand behaviors and attitudes, and then how's that going to ladder up into your 2021 plan, and look at that investment opportunity. But it's also thinking through, do we need to pivot our messaging and how we're going to market so that we are being more relevant, more believable, more timely with our customers. And then there's, the back end measurement to ensure that we can adjust with more real-time optimizations versus, going just through the campaign front to back. What do we do along the way in the middle so that we can pivot as the market and the customer is pivoting?
And a follow-up question I got, I received this from a sales director earlier this week. Jim, how, for both of you, Jim and Lori, but Jim, if you want to start, how has your in-house expertise evolved? And is that growth or maturity impacting your work with agencies and vendors and such?
So the in-house expertise, it's I think we are continually trying to learn. That's part of what I like to do with my team is are we getting better than we were before? And it's not just learning, of a new medium or a new channel or whatever. It's learning in things like behavioral economics and things that are causing behaviors to change. So I think that's a constant thing. The one thing that we are really encouraging, and we're starting to see some impact, is that the creative agency and media agency need to work together much more closely than they ever have. So it's not just this new channel. Now, what do we do? It's like, what's the right channel for this kind of message? Maybe a very emotional message or a very clinical message or whatever it is. There might be different channels that those are used for. I don't know that I could say, to tie it back to the question about expertise, we have knowledge in the space within our company. That's what we're looked for to deliver. I hope that's always increasing, that we're never just like on autopilot, just sort of doing the normal things, because no matter, that's what I said when I alluded earlier to this pandemic has just accelerated things were happening anyway. There are changes in the marketplace. This is a very different market in pharmaceutical marketing than 5 or 10 years ago. So you think ahead 5 years from now, what's it likely to be? Might there be many fewer reps or reps with different agendas, or maybe they have meeting, whatever, who knows what it could be, but that's the kind of stuff you start thinking about. And that's the expertise you try to develop in anticipation and not as much of a reaction.
I would definitely agree with that. I think as the pandemic is having our industry come together and collaborate to solve problems, I think we're seeing more changing the ways of working across industries with that support our businesses, and specifically where agencies might have competed before. We're looking at, what are the expertise to bring to the table so you can get the best product possible. So that's a new mentality, and but it is having a good impact. I think also when you're thinking about what else is changing is the rate of data that is being consumed and ingested has changed our ability to be smarter in the marketplace. And I see a lot of, data as being the new gold rush for our industry. And then how do we leverage this in a smart way that impacts our customers and has great business impact.
So one of the things Lori said just triggered another thought that I had, and because we're starting to explore this more, of using maybe several agencies in the space, whether it's within predictive models or creative or use of behavioral economics, things like that, where you might think about more of a specialist to bring in, even within the agency holding company or something, not necessarily within the agency that you're working with, but maybe some sister agency or whatever, where they have an expertise that you really want to use. And we're just investigating that, so we haven't gone too far with it yet. But my understanding from talking to colleagues internally that the key to success is you have to define the agency's role specifically. Okay, we're bringing in these other guys. They're going to work on this project from today through January 15th, and then their role is done. They're going to be responsible for this. You guys still own the whole, all that stuff. And being really specific about it can help you get, the right person in there to help. And I think, it's funny. I had some work done on my house with these construction guys with the bathrooms. Well, there's like these core guys doing the work, and then all of a sudden there's a glass guy that comes in, and then there's a stone cutter guy, and there's like all these specialists. They come in. There's more people coming in and out of this house. I don't even know who they all are, but they're very much specialists. And I started thinking about like marketing, like there's a role for that too. There's a role for the kind of the orchestra leader, the general director. But then there's like, I need a specialist with real expertise in understanding behavior, understanding behavioral economics techniques, and how to implement it, that is focused solely on that, where I don't know that I would have thought of that a couple of years ago. And so, you just bring them in, do their thing, they leave, and then the agency runs with it. The question will be, can the core agency handle that, right? I mean, can they handle the bringing in new people? And that's all about how, as a client, we would drive that. And maybe it'll work sometimes and maybe it won't, we'll see. But it's just something else we're thinking about that I hadn't really thought about before.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And thanks, Lori. It's an excellent segue to our big ball of wax question about data, KPIs, ROI. Data analytics, that's one of our biggest topics here. So we have a multi-part question, and we'll start with you, Lori. How are you using data and analytics to fuel decisions around HCP target audiences, selection of media channels, etc.?
Oh, wow. So it starts with the data analytics to ensure that you have the right channel and digital partnership mix. And I think the beauty of it, whether you're in a decentralized or centralized situation, of how you encapsulate your data, is that you go back and you look at that information as you're informing your choices, as well as channel ROIs. And so when you think about, as I think about my channel and vendor mix and meeting their objectives, these KPIs beyond just open and click-through engagement rates, but how deep did they go into the video, and what's their depth, and are customers shifting away from certain platforms and or vendors within the platforms, really inform our investment choices. And it's one of those things where you really should go back and look at the data and how your customers are engaging to inform some of those newer choices. Now, if you have newer segments, you may do more traditional if you don't have as much data behind it. But if you have that data, definitely leverage it versus just collecting it.
So I think we kind of look at a little bit of an art and science approach to this, because analytics, critical. You've got to know what's going on. We have models. We have attribution models and market mix models and all that stuff. but like any model is only looking backwards in time. It can't look forward without the sort of the subjective touch to it. So we look at that as a guideline and say, all right, we should be investing this percentage of the budget in this channel or whatever, and the total spend should be this. And then we kind of validate it based on past results. But then it's also, but wait a minute, but we're developing this great new creative that we think is really going to connect with you. We need to spend a little bit more there, or expand the reach a little bit to make sure we do this. Or our creative isn't that good, or we think not that it's not. You hope you never put anything in market you don't think is good, but you don't think it has the appeal that you might need it to have. So then you say, I'm going to be a little bit maybe more cautious in this spend, or something, our competitors coming into the marketplace, or something else you project might happen, either positive or negative, that cause you to adjust that spend. And then we have like biweekly. I mean, there's optimization going on daily at the agency, and then there's biweekly kind of meetings where you optimize the sort of the slower moving channels like email or something compared to things like search or banners, which are constant. So we can have a mix, and then we have a bigger meeting, less frequent, where you look at not just the clicks, but then, okay, they went to the site, like I think Laura mentioned about how much of the video they view, ultimately, then how much was their buying behavior change. So there's different levels of this. And I think it's really, we all know there's a ton of data out there, and it's how do you sift through and find out what really matters and discard the rest. Because you can get caught up into it and just find all these, these charts and data sets that are like, oh, that's interesting, but doesn't really tell you anything, and there's no trend to it, whatever. So that's a discipline that's hard to develop and then hard to maintain.
It sounds like the difference between reporting versus analysis, right?
Yeah.
Actionable intelligence versus just a lump of data.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's just to add, I think it's really important, when you're committed to digital, as many companies are, is that you do have this space of people or teams that actually kind of help you sift through some of these KPIs and ROIs. I agree there could be too much, but if you're focused on the right few based on that channel, you can probably come down with fairly good methodologies and models that kind of help guide your trends and where you're going to go in the future. I would also say, our customers, at least in the market that I am working in, all of them, where they're expecting to see the data is important as well, or see our assets or what we're putting into the market. So it's, how do you think through meeting the customer where they are at the right time, right channel? Because sometimes there's a decentralized approach versus just everybody going to our website. So that's been an interesting piece to kind of think through, as well as the market is shifting and where our customers are going.
It's interesting because for a while there, up until maybe last year or so, the website was a separate initiative, like a separate team was managing it, and it was like that doesn't make any sense. Yet everything we're doing points to the website, and for the team working on it, it was typically a lower priority, so it wouldn't get updated as much. It wasn't as good. It didn't match the creative, all that stuff. And then we realized that's not a really good idea, So we decided we need to manage that and make it an integral part of the plan. So not only do you have certain campaigns, you have the website's going to be updated on these dates, and it's these number of pages and so on, and really look to do a lot more testing on the website too, where different creative messages, different display designs and so on, that you can actually make that experience better. Because in the end, we're trying to create this experience that has value to the customers, that they're seeing this information that they really need, and what they're going to see next is what they need next. And how do we know this? We know this because we're doing all this work, all this statistical stuff, all the artistic stuff, and we're testing a lot, and we're ending up with just how did they know I needed to know this right now? That's what I want them to feel. It's not easy, and it's a lot of work, but and a lot of planning. That's because you have to plan ahead. You get a great idea, how long till you can implement it. So it's hard, but I think that's really where we're going. It is all driven by analytics, but by data. Because if you don't have that, you're just guessing, and that's not, you might get lucky, but that's not the right way to approach it.
So, again, a couple of rapid fire questions. Is there a strategy difference right now between older, more established therapeutics, drugs versus newer ones?
Um, I think there always has been a strategy difference between newer, more established drugs versus, new drugs versus established ones. And how we're, you know, w- based on the maturity curve of that particular life cycle and adoption is, what do you want to do? Newer ones, you probably need more awareness, more share of voice. Where older ones, where you're looking more around, newer patient populations and what are the resources to keep someone potentially on therapy. So there's definitely should be a strategy difference between older, in my opinion, versus newer drugs.
It's interesting. I think it's kind of, I, that makes sense. But you look at it and you say the strategy will be different, but it's like, what's the situation? So if it's an older brand, you're probably going to be focused more on customer retention than on acquisition. A newer brand, it's the opposite. Did I say that right? Yeah, more on retention than acquisition. Newer brands, much more on acquisition, of course. So that those kind of directions lead to a whole bunch of other activities and strategies. And that's just natural to the situation. But then you say, well, we have an older brand that is going to be facing a competitive threat in the coming year. So that leads to a different strategy. Okay, what are we going to do? That's not just business as usual, because we're going to have a competitor at some point and they're going to have certain messaging and we need to do things differently. So all these other circumstances affect that too. So it's not just an older or newer product, it's a whole bunch of other variables that go into it as well.
True.
Have you, we've talked about a few sort of new technologies. Have you made decisions or invested more during the last 6 months, or looking ahead in new technologies or capabilities, meaning new since the pandemic, to help you inform those decisions?
Well, for us, I mean, there were things in the works, and we're always looking at new things, but I can't say there's been anything new since the pandemic. Things like telehealth, at least for me, aren't as valuable because it's a vaccine, and we're not really, we haven't.
Mm-hmm.
Telehealth is sort of the enemy, I guess. Where it's that we can't vaccinate them over the computer, but so no, but we haven't really thought about that yet. And it's interesting because new channels and like that's very tactical kind of thinking there, which you need at times. But as we face a pandemic and figure out what to do, I think we're trying to think more strategically about bigger picture. What are we trying to do? And are there new channels and new things that can help us get there? That's great. But we're not starting with that. We're sort of following with that.
Yeah, I would agree that many of these investments in newer technology and capabilities just don't pop up right overnight. We've been working on them for a while. What the pandemic has highlighted is how to pull them through faster, possibly, and get them into market, so that we can, reap the benefits of new platforms and capabilities versus, starting just because the pandemic was there.
Yeah, it's
Gotcha.
interesting. I had a thought, and I'm doing some research on this. Is it almost the opposite? Old school, like you think of something like direct mail, at least as consumers, we're all at home now all the time. One of the highlights of the day is going out to the mailbox. First of all, I get out of the chair for 30 seconds or something, and who knows what's going to be there. It's sort of like 20 years ago, and I think there's an opportunity there because you have more opportunity. There's more availability of time and just to go get something. And even in a physician's office or something too, there, I would think, they're, unfortunately for them, they may be seeing fewer patients. Something like the mail coming in may get more attention. So it's not necessarily just something a new technology. It's actually maybe the oldest technology that might be the one that matters most.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you talked about again, traditional KPIs, open rate, engagement. Are there new meaningful KPIs that come to mind that if you've sat in meetings and you're like, that KPI just keeps coming up, somebody from the data and analytics team just keeps saying it, that you're going to raise the level of where that KPI ranks on how important it is moving forward? Lori?
I would say we're always looking beyond the traditional KPIs. I don't know that there's one specific new one at this point in time. But there are always variables that we're looking at around, how to better measure engagement strategies across our customers. And it's always a little in flux, but once we land on something, I think the other thing is making sure that the model is reliable and statistically there. And then, how do you launch a new KPI potentially around customer engagement? But we're always kind of blueprinting and blue skying some of those things. I would say, again, beyond open and click, we talked about depth, and it's really understanding how deep some of our customers are going based on the tactic is important. And also, I would want to know, especially in this environment, how are we looking at consistency and frequency with our customers across the different channels? Because just like a representative goes into the door, it's not one and done with digital. You kind of have to have that pattern of frequency and consistency.
So I'll bring up two things that we've used differently to try to monitor what's going on. First is search impressions for our key AdWord groups, where if you look at, you start looking at, and in my world of physician behavior, are there changes in numbers of searches for different types of vaccines or seeing patients, whatever the words are, and is that's giving a sort of a leading indicator that if they're searching on those terms, that means they're interested in the topic, that will assume it means they're seeing patients, and that we can start to act, differently. And then we can drill into it, depending on the volume. It might be a geo thing or whatever, but search activity, I think, it's a natural behavior. So the more we can monitor that, it can give us insight into just what people are thinking. And then the others, and I'd love to ask, although I guess I can't see the responses, but we use MVAs and HQVs as really key as KPIs. How's that for a bunch of acronyms in one sentence? Does anybody on there look at MVAs or HQVs, if I even have those right? I'm just curious. So maybe not, maybe we can't figure that out. But an MVA is the most valued action, and then a high quality visit. And those are both on the site. So you define those things very specifically. It's a video view, it's a download of something, it's time on site of whatever. We are also looking at modeling that sort of thing, where like, okay, it is a logic to it that says, if you go to the site and if you watch this video, you're probably likely, you're more likely to become a customer than if not, or something like that. But I would love to be able to put some math to it and say, okay, if you do that, there's a 30% probability that you're going to become a customer or whatever. And then you can start doing some math that's going to say, all right, if I do that, and I can define and measure the value of that, that can help me go back and then determine how much I can invest to get people there. Because at 30%, and you do all the math and you say, okay, I can invest $30 a physician to get them there, or whatever it is. I think that's the kind of stuff that the different kind of KPIs now that are, because most of our efforts drive to the website. That, well, what are they doing on the website? Because they're not getting all the brand information through the other channels. The website is the repository of all the information. So if they go and take the right actions, depending on where they are in the funnel and all those sort of things, that's where the probabilities come in. So those are the kind of things we're kind of playing around with right now to see if we can not become so totally analytics driven that you just don't need us. You just have robots do this work. So you add the human element, which is what exactly does this mean, and what should the messaging change be, and what do we follow up with if they do that. So that's kind of the way we're looking at it, in a different way that maybe we would have done a year ago.
Yeah, and one last specific question about data, and we've got some questions coming in. Thanks to everybody. Get your questions in. We'll start the Q&A in about 5 or 6 minutes. Trending year over year. How are you guys going to look at March 2021 or forecasting March 2021 versus March or April or May of 2020? Have you talked about what is there going to be leniency? Or I know that some publishers and media folks saw huge spikes. how are you going to judge year over year moving forward? Have you talked about that?
You can go,
Yeah.
So
Lori.
I would, yeah. It's a great question. I think, when we're doing most of our modeling attributes and when working with our statisticians, they're able to do some type of control for COVID that kind of helps us. I mean, the question is this the new steady state, or do we need to control for it? So I actually look to the expertise of other departments to help with that. So I know we do a lot of controlling now, but if this, if it's unfortunate and we're still in the same state this time next year, which I hope we're not, then maybe it does become a bit of the normal. But right now, I think there's a lot of controlling for the impacts of the pandemic.
'Cause maybe one of the things that could help is like you look at market share for the brand, and
Yeah.
if the volume is down but share is the same, or or whatever is happening with share, you can maybe draw that conclusion and say, well, if pandemic hadn't hit, our share would be the same as whatever it is.
Yeah.
That would equal this amount of business, and that's either good or bad or whatever. That's one way to kind of normalize it a little bit, but there's no perfect way. But in the end, we all have financial goals to deliver for the company, and they're tolerant to a point on this, but then it's like, all right, we got to do something about this. We have to, and I think it's a great challenge. That none of us know the future, but the reality is we didn't know the future anyway. It was it just wasn't as dramatic. So we have to now figure out what are we assuming, what are we gonna do about it, and be more take more of an assertive role in it than just saying, well, the pandemic, we're stuck here, there's nothing we can do. It's like if you look at restaurants around your wherever you live, some of them seem to be doing really well. Like they figured it out, they've got the curbside, and others seem to be like retreating and just maybe even going out of business. Now there may be a lot of other factors than just what you see as a consumer driving by. But what I take out of it, at least at a high level, is you have maybe more control than you think, although not total control, about your own actions. So go for it, see what happens, react to whatever is happening. And sometimes you may need to withdraw, and we talked in one of our brands about a top of the funnel issue. There's a top of the funnel, not many people going to the doctor. So I said, well, we have a middle of the funnel opportunity then, because those that are going to the doctor are getting treated. How do we address that? It's a different strategic approach than what we might have otherwise done. I don't know if it'll work or not, but it's at least an action that we're taking to drive towards the financial goals. Because the goals aren't, we'll get a little bit of leeway, but in the end, it's still, okay, as the year goes on, the goals keep getting compressed into shorter and shorter time periods. And now we have to have our best November ever to make, it's like, well, that's just numbers on a spreadsheet. But so somewhere in there, I think it's a feeling of like, hey, we can do more than just sit back and absorb the blows.
Yep.
Great. Last question, and then we'll open up for Q&A. New and social media. Laura, you mentioned this earlier. New innovative opportunities as we look to 2021. Again, this is a popular topic amongst this group. Lori, if you don't mind, can you share, have you shifted any focus to include or experimentation with new media and engagement tactics, podcasts? You've talked about video. Jim has already scratched telehealth off of their EHRs. What's new on the stove? What's cooking?
So I would say the shift to some of these channels, with the exception of telehealth, kind of happened pre-pandemic. And when I think of social, I think of it in two ways. There's the restricted HCP social through the Doximities of the world, and then there's the verge of going into like open paid social through Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, where I think we were at the tipping point pre-pandemic, and it has opened our eyes to say, what else can we do? Because we know some of our customers have shifted there, at least from our vantage point. And then how do we get the right information? Because through podcasting, through open social channels into the hands of customers. So although it was a pre-pandemic shift, we are, looking to, how do you open that aperture post-pandemic? I think telehealth is a tricky one. It's not off the list, it's just the how. And I think once we figure out the how in telehealth, because there's so many different disparate opportunities in telehealth, at least from an ad perspective, but there could be, how do we think more of partnerships in telehealth versus just paid advertising? So I think that's one that we still blueprint and think through on what are the opportunities, because I believe it will be here in the future as another viable option.
Jim, any thoughts on new and social, new media?
I think, like to Lori's point, we've been using social before the pandemic too. And, I'm probably one of the outliers. I'm not as bullish on it as other people are. I think it's good. It's helpful. There's an opportunity. I'm just not sure it's big enough. And it's also much more time intensive internally, to get things approved. And it's a little bit, so you have to value and evaluate your team's time and the agency time as well as the cost. So is this going to be worth the effort of going through multiple iterations of review for something that maybe maybe it yields something, maybe it doesn't, versus other things that we could be doing? So I do look at it, if it fits our strategy, then we should do it. But I don't want to just do like something on social just because leadership says we need to be doing more social, and there's some chart somewhere that says X% of our budget needs to be social, which I think happens at times. So that's not of any interest to me. And I just think it's not quite as big for us as it might be in the consumer world, for example.
Yeah, just to add to some other comments, I would say on social, it is, I think it does present a new challenge, but I think it depends on your customer base, and if your customer base is there. If your customer base is there, there's the opportunity to crack the social network and provide a new aperture of channels. I do believe that it's not a lift and shift of content. You really have to think about like native platform content and how to do that right in the channel so that you show up credible, believable, and people want to engage with you. And so that's a good thing to work on that you can do without 1,000 iterations.
100% with that. That's where we've had success in some of our other non-vaccine brands on social, is developing content. Appropriate may not be the right word, but most comfortable within the Facebook, infrastructure, and not just technically, but that it's a different way of communicating the message, because it isn't just put the same message that you would put in a physician's journal or something on Facebook or Instagram or something. It has to be done differently. And in some cases, we're willing to put that effort in other cases, we haven't been, in which case we won't advertise there. We don't want to just put the same old ad there because it's not going to work.
Great. And we'll kick off the Q&A portion with a question that dovetails nicely from Dana Trimborn. Have you used any ads recently within health podcasts that would be relevant for the physician to not only listen and gain knowledge, but to also hear a sponsored ad for a product?
So we have advertised on podcasts. Wasn't sure the second part of the question, but yeah, we've advertised a product on the podcast.
I don't know that we've advertised a product on podcasts. I think we're looking to produce. How do you think of producing your own podcast so that you can get a listening audience is really on the lines of most, versus being a sponsored ad in between podcasts.
Yep.
So that you can have that one-on-one dialogue.
Yeah, I guess that would be having worked in that space, are you looking to place ads in podcasts or partner on a full podcast channel, shall we say? Would that be a better way to ask that question? Individual ads for a product, or partnering with somebody to work on the podcast? And I think that's what you were talking about, Lori.
Yeah, I would look for more of the partnership.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's the bigger opportunity. We haven't done that, and so just running ads, it's like a media placement, which is fine, but it's not the breakthrough that a partnership developing your own podcast could be.
Great. And from Christine Perino, how are you leveraging personalization to increase relevance of content message experience to your customers, not segmentation per se, but leveraging personalization platforms and technologies?
So I would say A, hi, Christine. And B, I think leveraging personalization is important so that there's a bunch of ways you can do this. There's technology that helps with personalization, understanding right channel, right message, right time at that moment for the customer. Um, some people call it next best action, some people call it next best engagement. There's all kinds of tools out there. But I would also say is, going a layer deeper is how do you start to think about the persona work that you're using and developing and portraits or digital customer portraits with our customers and making sure that that is personalized so that, Dr. Hancock gets a certain type of subject line that's an infographic that goes with right message time based on how I have been interacting with content in the past versus the next doctor could be Smith, who has a more integrative persona on subject lines, but a different type of maybe more clinical versus infographic. And so I think when you get to that point, you've really met your customer preferences and you're able to still give that message, but display it in different ways across your segments. And so that's the exciting part.
And I think we've done little in the way of using personalization, and I think there's a huge opportunity there. It's and I think it's a lot of testing and learning from that because I think from what my research into personalization is people are not offended by personalization as long as it's relevant to them and has value to them. So if I tell you, I know you've been buying this many products from us, and based on some other information we have, we think you may be able to serve more patients if you, with an extra number of doses or whatever. There may be value in that, or there's other things that we might use the data that we have to create a more valuable message for the customer, and not just tell them what we know about them, but turn that into value. Otherwise, it's just like, okay, you're telling me what I already know. I think through things like Amazon and other that we all buy through, we know that they know our buying history, and we actually want to be reminded when there's certain things that we've been buying but haven't bought lately. Whether we choose to buy or not is a separate question. Why can't we do that more? We noticed your buying, your pattern has changed in buying. You used to be buying a lot more. What's the right message to address them with? Is there something we can do? You need to talk to somebody or whatever, instead of just totally not using that information to the customer's benefit, because maybe there's some reason that they're not buying. And there's something we can do about it, or maybe there's not. At least you come up with some hypotheses to prove it out. But I think there's so much data that we can use to make it a better experience. We just haven't, and I think we're heading that way. But I get the feeling it's going to take a while. I'm not sure why, because it's pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, I would just to add to and build upon some of those comments is, I really think personalization is, I want to say, the wave of the future, but it's a really important capability to bring into your digital strategy. There's a blend, or starting to get a blend, especially now, between what your expectations are in your personal life versus your professional life. And, some of the real-time demands of that you can get with personalized messages are starting to dribble and drabble over into the professional life as well. And so I think the more we kind of think about that space and how to capitalize on that in the future is going to be really key for us.
Excellent. A question from Milton Barkos. Outside of ATUs that you share with agency partners, do you also share the actionable results with agencies to determine if multi-channel programs are successful and tied to your long-term KPIs?
We have the agency partners are involved in. They attend all the analytics meetings. Because it was surprising to me a couple of years ago when one of the writers at our agency said, yeah, he's never even seen the results of how these emails worked out. He spends all this time developing subject lines and goes through all the, the review, and then doesn't even, I thought that's crazy. We can't do that. So yeah, no, we have these biweekly meetings I mentioned, the agencies are all invited, media agency, creative agency, database, anybody involved is invited. And they usually attend. And if they don't attend, they get the document anyway. So yeah, we share it all.
Yeah, I would agree. You have to create that space and forum for the not just the media agency, but the creative agency and anyone else that's been touching that digital content, including marketing. And when you have this, diversity of people invested in the digital content, it's important for them to understand why you're making certain recommendations and why you're pivoting. Based on the data and how things are performing, and they want to know because it just helps them do a better job and helping us kind of create what things could look like in a compliant way. So I think it's important to inform.
Question from Lori Raskin. You're talking about the customer journey and providing the right message through the right channel. Is that in addition to the marketing plan and as part of the flexible pivoting Part B plan? Jim, I think that's kind of, you were talking about Part B a little bit earlier.
Yeah. So, we have a plan, it's the backup plan, I guess, is the way to look at it. Can you say the first part of the question again? I was a little trying to make sure I understand it.
In talking about the customer journey and providing right message, right channel, is that in addition to the marketing plan and as part of the flexible pivoting Part B plan?
So, okay. So it's a little bit different than what I was talking about with the backup plan, because that backup plan is just reacting to, the effect of COVID that we have assumed or not assumed. So I think that's separate from this. The journey part of it is about the experience we're trying to create. I think it's an evolving space where right now you have a plan. And you do the plan the traditional way, you have media placements and you have messages and you do all that stuff. I think over time, what's going to happen is it's all going to be reactive to customer behavior. So you set a list of criteria, they act or they don't act on that. Whichever they do, that leads to a different set of messages. If they don't act, that leads to maybe fewer messages or whatever. And it's all going to be, that is going to be the plan. It's not just going to be, okay, here's the schedule, we follow it. I think it's going to be much more reactive to customer behavior. And that's all enabled by having data, the ability to get data quicker, response data quicker, knowing what's happening. So I don't have to wait a month to find out this doctor responded to this message. Okay, what am I going to do now? I need to know that the next day. So then I can say, all right, should we alert the sales rep? Should we send them another message? Should we send them a video? What should we do? That's what the planning is going to be about. And it's going to be constant iteration of that. That's what I think is going to happen. We're not there yet. I think this is going to be an evolution over the next maybe 12, 18 months, depending on, on how fast we can develop the content is going to be the key to that. More than the channels, more than the reaction, more than defining the business rules. It's going to be, if I need to send you a message B, do I have message B available when I need it? Because it's not just message B, it's going up to message C. And that's going to be the challenge.
And just to build upon that, I feel like if I can understand the question, the customer journey from a marketing map is one thing around the end-to-end journey as you're mapping out different stages of either adoption or how the patient is moving through treatment therapy. But I also think there's a journey around a digital engagement journey and how do you think about those longitudinal plans and how they ladder back up. And having that longer longitudinal plan is important because then you're thinking more long-term of your content based on your market insights and research. And you're able to get that faster into the marketplace and then change and pivot as you need to.
Question from Neethu Chappelle from Elsevier. Great discussion. Thanks, Lori and Jim. As part of marketing strategy, how important is aligning with digital KOLs to your respective organization? And if important, what would success look like when partnering with publishers like us?
Wow. I mean, I think if we could, that's digital KOLs are really important, or we call them, some people call them DOLs versus, how do you partner with thought leaders to do from a crawl, walk, run. It's around, um, you know, influencer strategy versus getting a one-way dialogue with them versus a two-way dialogue. And I think there's different points depending on the company you're in where you're trying to kind of crack that code in a very compliant way. And so we usually welcome those type of insights on how to do that better with go-to-market strategies.
I don't have a lot to add to that part of it. Companies like Elsevier and others, we look for those kinds of companies to bring to us the ideas on how do you develop the content? How do you help develop the story? How do you help, think about it as creating value for the customer through their lens. I believe most pharma marketing is inner driven. Like we look at it through our lens first instead of the customer lens. So it's like, if there's value, if you think there's a way to bring value to a customer in the story that we're trying to tell through a different way, then we should be all interested in hearing it. If it's another way to sell something else, then it's not, it's just another, option of how to spend the budget. So I think it is, why is this going to be valued by the customer, whatever it is you're promoting, and where does it fit in the scheme of this experience we're creating? And there's got to be a lot of trial and error, because I don't think there's any magic answer to it. And we talk about journeys all the time, and then we'll all say they're not linear. We know they're not linear, but what are they then? And how do you know where people are? And how do you know all this stuff? I think there's only one way to learn it, and that's to try a bunch of stuff. We can talk about it all the time and create these day in the life kind of stuff and all that. And it's like, I found that just goes in circles, and you never really get breakthrough ideas. So to me, minimum viable product, all that kind of thinking is really the opportunity. Come up with something viable that can help drive a behavior you're looking to drive, get it in market, learn from it, know it's not going to be perfect, and move on. We're not typically oriented that way in pharma marketing. It's much more like make it perfect. You can't afford to have anything go wrong.
Great. A couple more questions from Joe Frank. How are you managing virtual live conference media, and do you see the live meeting experience bouncing back soon?
I think virtual conference is more like a test and learn for us right now. We had these plans, and then what you see is, we had to pivot and shift, and as we're learning how conferences are dictating whether they're going to be live in the future or they're going to be more virtual, we're learning to grow and add new partnerships, whether it's a virtual booth or how do you leverage channels around a conference. To kind of broaden, and highlight some of the things that are coming out of the conference that are important for those, who couldn't travel, or, all of us at home. So I think it's still from my perspective, it's still a learn, and that is one of the more channels that are in a state of flux from a planning perspective, because we just don't know what's going to happen.
Yep. Jim, you're deep in that vaccine world.
But I'm not very deep in the virtual conference world, so I don't really have much to add to that, because I mean, GSK does, but I don't, so I really can't add anything to that.
No problem. Anonymous question: is content marketing part of your tactical array?
Content marketing and tactical array. Wow, that's a cool term. No, why would somebody be anonymous if they're saying things like tactical array? That's consultant worthy, speak. So, I mean, content marketing. It's what is content? It's like one of the terms now that's been thrown around a lot. It is critical. What I talked about earlier: segmentation, message, media, and website. That's how we look at the business. So message is the second thing in there. It's always important. It always matters a lot, because, what's our strategy? What's the campaign flow that we want to get there? There's another type of content that we haven't developed, which I think is more editorial type content, storytelling, more journalistic, the type you'd find in magazines in the old days, or on blogs or things. I think there's opportunity there, but we're not there yet. So our content right now is all promotional content designed to communicate brand benefits and stories about the brand, but not really, maybe there's another opportunity beyond that to get into other types of content. Think of more like an article about why I became a doctor, because my sister contracted meningitis B. That's why I became a doctor. So that story might be really interesting and lead you to start thinking different about vaccination as a healthcare professional. That's not the stuff we're writing today. That we're writing why our brand is good, why you should be vaccinating with our brand.
Yeah, I agree. Content is always king. And you have to have if you have a good digital strategy, you have to have a good content strategy that kind of goes along with it and hand in hand. And, learning more, if you, again, getting back to some of the personalization comments, I think that the content strategy is very important, because then you start to understand your customer content affinity and what they are gravitating towards and not, and you can have different micro segments based on that. And also maybe, as you get customer insights along the way, it's really good to get a customer feedback on the content you're designing to see if it is going to resonate with their peers.
Yeah, there was a follow-up. Are you creating the content based on known gaps in knowledge, understanding that HCPs are falling short in a particular area or something like that? Is that a active strategy?
I think it needs to be an active strategy. It's part of your digital presence and campaign, and how do you bring those market research insights into either behaviors or attitudes of perception, and bring that into your content strategy. So when you go to market, you've got the right message.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're past the hour mark, and we've covered a lot of space, and we've answered a lot of Q&A. I think we're ready to wrap up. Again, for those on the still on the roundtable, appreciate your time today. Jim, Lori, thank you for your insights and commentary. Again, any other questions or concerns, ammonline.org, and self-plug, be on the lookout for season 3 of AMM Conversation podcast, which will feature highlights from this discussion. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and make sure to vote.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Lori.
Bye.
Go Eagles.
Yes.